So it's been a while since I made a video. Life keeps throwing curveballs at me, and then I make excuses not to make videos, but today I decided I'd carve out some time and actually get to it. So I wanted to address this straw man that gets created by primarily feminists, but also a either uninformed or willfully ignorant media when they cherry pick the worst of these different online communities, Gamergate, pickup artists, MGTOW, the MRM, and they just throw them all together into this basket, this general umbrella term that they call men's rights. And then once they've established this straw man men's rights movement, they just shove it all off the table, discount and disregard any opposing perspective that's coming from outside of the feminist bubble. And that's a lot of people because only 20% of people in the US, I think it's actually like 18, but less than a fifth of people actually identify as feminists. And that I'm not going to argue that everyone who doesn't identify as a feminist is anti-feminist, but I have to assume that there's probably an equivalent number of people, another 18 to 20% of the population, that is familiar with the feminist ideology and what feminism is putting forth today. You'd have to be just about blind not to notice it, because the gender discussion has been very prevalent in the last 3 to 4 years. The gender and race, sociological discussion about gender roles and oppression, privilege, etc. This is everywhere now. So I have to assume that there's got to be at least an equal number of people who are aware of the feminist position and reject it for some other community like MGTOW or pickup artists or whatnot. And to try to marginalize and ignore, to encourage feminists to ignore all of these perspectives as just hate speech, is doing a disservice to everyone. It's doing a disservice to feminists. And if you're a feminist, you're probably not going to like hearing me say this, but it's my opinion that if feminists actually exposed themselves to and educated themselves on what men's rights activists are saying, what pickup artists are saying, you would have a better chance of evolving your perspective and your rhetoric on how to talk to these people, on not just on how to talk to pickup artists and men's rights activists, but how to talk to people who are outside of this conversation, who have heard a little bit from different perspectives and aren't sure where they fit in. The better you understand your opposition, the better you can persuade other people on your position and why you think there's some merit to this idea and why there are drawbacks to this idea, and you can persuade people better. But if you ignore half of the discussion that's been going on gender and race issues and just throw labels at it, bigot, racist, sexist, KKK, supremacist, blah, 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 then you're harming your own intellectual evolution here. And it also makes it harder for the other side, the MRM and pickup artists, to evolve their perspective and their arguments too. So I think it's better for everyone if we break down some of these partisan ideology walls and get to know each other better. So one thing that I hear a lot is that men's rights is exclusively for straight, cis, able-bodied white guys. And on the face of it, I think that claim is a little bit absurd, because if you just look at the talking points that MRAs are always bringing up, you've got male homelessness. Men are homeless at 4 times the rate of women. Male suicide rates. Men complete suicide at 4 times the rate that women do. You've got male genital mutilation, infant circumcision. About 60 to 80% of men in the US are circumcised without their consent within a couple weeks of being born. And then you've also got sentencing disparities. Men are sentenced to roughly 63% longer jail time than women for the same crime and are twice as likely to be convicted. If you look at just these 4 issues, and there are more, but just these 4 issues, none of them are exclusive to white men. Circumcision affects all men. Now, it is true that primarily it's white men who get circumcised, but there are black men who are getting circumcised at birth, whose consent is being either violated or completely ignored. They don't have bodily autonomy. This is an issue that is inclusive by its very nature of all men. Sentencing disparities. In this case, if you want to get intersectional about men's rights, this is an issue that almost certainly intersectionally impacts black men. So there should be some overlap here between those who want sentencing equality and justice for black offenders and white offenders as with male and female offenders, because I'm almost certain that black men are going to be sentenced much more heavily than any white woman. The data would show us that white men are going to be sentenced more heavily than white women, and that black men will be sentenced more heavily than black women. But on the totem pole here, black men are going to get hit the hardest with the sentencing inequality issue. And so when MRAs are bringing up sentencing inequality between men and women, understand that this is not just an issue that affects white men. It's going to not only affect all men, but it's going to disproportionately affect black men. Circumcision, for example, homelessness, gay men are homeless. Gay men get circumcised. Gay men get sentenced longer for the same crime as straight women. These are issues that affect all men. So these topics that they're bringing up are not exclusive to white men. And the movement itself hardly excludes minority men or gay men from speaking about their issues. Even the most angry and dangerous of MRA sites, the notorious A Voice for Men, it's very easy to find articles on their site that have been written by gay men, by Latino men, by black men. You could call this tokenism if you want to, but you cannot deny the fact that the MRM fairly regularly invites people who are not straight white men to talk about issues. For Pete's sake, probably one of the most prominent, outspoken MRAs in the entire community is Karen Strawn. And most of the MRAs that I talk to love Karen. She's like MRA mom. A lot of MRAs really like Christina Hoff Sommers, who still calls herself a feminist, even though most of the feminist movement rejects her, and she's very critical of third wave feminism. But MRAs, they're very happy to hear women and minorities and gays speak on their issues. On the other hand, there are feminist groups that exclude cis white gay men from their communities for being not oppressed enough. So if you want to make an argument about who's more of an ally to gay men, the water gets a little bit more murky, and the situation is not quite as black and white as I often hear it being presented as. But what about the misogyny? What about the rape culture? I heard that MRAs promote making rape legal on private property. I heard that MRAs tell men not to date or marry because women are all gold-digging sluts who want to take their money. Okay, so this is why it's important to understand the distinction between these different groups, between pickup artists and Return of Kings and MRAs and MGTOW. For example, if you point out some of the very anti-male hateful quotes, if I talk about kill all men, the hashtag, almost any feminist will tell me, oh, that's not feminism, that's misandry, and they're different. Or I point out some really stupid thing that some feminist said. Someone will say, oh no, that's white feminism, her feminism isn't intersectional enough. Okay, so clearly on the feminist end of the spectrum, there is an understanding that there is a spectrum within feminism. There are trans-exclusionary radical feminists, there are white feminists, there's intersectional feminists, there's liberal feminists and classical feminists and different waves of feminism. So if you expect men as a whole, MRAs, non-MRAs, just people, to be tolerant of and understanding of and educated on the different branches of feminism, is it not fair to ask that feminists also educate themselves on the different branches of non-feminist masculine identities and communities? I think it's reasonable. And yes, there are radical extreme voices on the other end of the spectrum, and if you are a feminist, yes, you're going to find these very unpalatable, just like a lot of MRAs and pickup artists find extreme SJW feminist rhetoric to be extremely frustrating. And, that's okay. We hopefully are all mature enough to understand that the radicals of any community are louder and more obvious than the moderates. Often the radicals have the most impact and the most effect, that's a debate for another time. I'm going to try and compare MGTOW and pickup artists because I feel like they're kind of at polar opposite ends of the non-feminist manosphere spectrum. in terms of their strategies for interacting with and dealing with women. So MGTOW stands for Men Going Their Own Way, and their central ideas focus on men being very wary of the risks they expose themselves to in their relationships with women, and the dynamics of how men approach relationships and how women approach relationships, how those aren't always the same. And for example, MGTOWs are probably going to point out to you that the family courts are heavily weighted in women's favor, and that women initiate 80% of no-fault divorce in America. This is true, by the way. So they're going to tell you, why put yourself at risk for a marriage that might not work out, where she's far more likely to leave you than the reverse, and then the courts will side with her, and you're going to end up paying alimony and child support for kids that you won't even have custody of for the rest of your life. So if you're going to expose yourself to the risk of marriage, you should at least be educated on what you're risking, get a prenup or something. Some MGTOWs will go a step further than that, and they'll say that the entire sexual marketplace is weighted in women's favor, and it's just not worth jumping through the hoops that men jump through to try and please a woman and get a woman, and that you don't need a woman in your life to bring you happiness or satisfaction. There was a study a couple years ago on OkCupid activity between men and women, and it found that when it comes to rating the attractiveness of the opposite sex, men rated women on a bell curve, which is about what you'd expect. Most women are between 4 and 6. You've got a couple haughty 7 and 8s, and then a couple unicorn supermodels that are 9s and 10s. But women rated 75% of men as being under average attractiveness. So the average MGTOW is probably going to tell you, hey, they don't even, women don't like you. Women don't find you attractive, and you could spend hours learning how to style your hair and dress up and how to go through the motions and jump through hoops to get her to like you. But even then, if you do get the girl and you put a ring on it and you get married, she's 4 times more likely to leave you than the reverse, and then you're going to end up being one of those homeless guys that the MRAs are going to talk about. So, or maybe you're going to kill yourself. This is also true that recently divorced men are 4 or 5 times more likely to kill themselves. So the average MGTOW is probably going to tell you, hey, why jump through all those hoops? Why put yourself at risk for becoming a statistic? You can stay at home and play video games and read books and work out or smoke weed and eat Doritos all day, but whatever, just pursue your own interests. You don't need a woman to make yourself happy. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got pickup artists, and pickup artists, for the most part, don't seem to have very much patience for what they see as being beta male or even omega male whiny self-victimization that you're going to get from MGTOWs and even a lot of men's rights advocates. Their interest is primarily in using the sexual marketplace as it is and teaching men how to best navigate and approach the gender dynamics that currently exist for men to get the greatest benefit, to achieve what they want to with women, whether it be sexual or long-term relationship, whatever. Now, within both these communities, there's going to be a range of voices, and some of them are going to focus primarily on giving men suggestions and advice on how to deal with certain situations. Some who are anti-feminists who fit within one of these bubbles, who address anti-feminism from a pickup artist or MGTOW perspective, and you are going to find some embittered, sexually frustrated, or just angry guys, even male chauvinists, sexists, and misogynists.
Chauvinists and sexists and misogynists. Chauvinists, sexists, misogynists.
There is extremism in every movement, within MGTOW, within pickup artists, within MRA communities, and within feminism. So I won't discount the existence of these people. But one point that I want to make really clear here is that MGTOWs and pickup artists are not men's rights activists. They're not out there trying to change the legal status of men when it comes to circumcision. They're not out there trying to get the UK government to recognize sexual assault against men as rape. They're not actually doing activism on behalf of men's rights. So, just because they have an anti-feminist perspective and there are communities that are centered around men and men's role in society and how men should interact with women, that doesn't make them men's rights activists. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. The Make Rape Legal on Private Property article is one written by Rushby over at Return of Kings, which is a pretty well-known neo-masculinist, pseudo-pickup artist community. And he has claimed the article is satire. I think you'd have to read it for yourself to make that determination. It's a very heavy-handed, tongue-in-cheek argument that if rape was legal on private property, that women would have to be much more judicious, modest, and careful about how they behave and how they select men. Obviously, this is meant to provoke feminists. I think he wrote this article as clickbait in order to get a lot of controversy and make his site more notorious, to get more attention. It worked, but it also made him appear very radical, and it made it that much easier for feminists to just write off the entire men's rights community, despite the fact that Rushby and Return of Kings have said over and over and over again that they are not MRAs. They have a lot of issues with the men's rights community and often make the same criticism of men's rights that feminists do, that men's rights activists are ineffective, they just complain online, and they're just sexual losers who want society to cater to them. And I think some of his criticisms about the MRM are valid. I also think that a lot of his solutions and perspectives are extremely radical. He's been known to suggest a whole lot of things. His tactics for helping men get laid and include destroying the self-esteem of women that they're pursuing, and has talked about women lacking intellectual insight and just being generally not as smart as men. So I don't think it is really that radical to argue that Roosh is a chauvinist, male supremacist. These seem to be badges that he kind of wears with pride. So I would really like it if people would come to grips with the fact that these communities are not necessarily the same. They do have a lot of infighting and significant differences in perspective. And if they're not advocating for the legal rights of men, they aren't MRAs. MGTOW are not MRAs. Pickup artists are not MRAs. MGTOWs look at the MRA issues and say, hey, society is unfair to men in a lot of ways, particularly in the sexual arena, so fuck all that noise. I'm going to stay home and play League of Legends, or go to the gym, or educate myself and just pursue a life that is centered on what I want and not worry about that. Pickup artists say, who gives a shit about whether society is fair or unfair? I want to get laid. What do I have to do to achieve that? So as random as this may seem, I want to pull up some comments that Bernie made recently in the wake of Trump being declared the victor in the 2016 election, and see if we can apply some of his reasoning to the ideological conflict between these different communities. Putting aside his policies, I have really admired Bernie's rhetorical ability to unite people around issues rather than fixating on scandals and personal attacks. And he had this to say, and I really loved this. To the degree that Mr. Trump is serious about pursuing policies that improve the lives of working families in this country, I and other progressives are prepared to work with him. To the degree that he pursues racist, sexist, xenophobic, and anti-environment policies, we will vigorously oppose him. So why am I sharing this random political quote? Because I think at the core of Bernie's message here is the idea that you can support the positive aspects of an ideological opponent and encourage them to improve, grow, and succeed in those aspects while still staying true to your own values and resisting them on points that you think are harmful and detrimental to others. And I think that this is an attitude that really needs to be adopted within the feminist and non-feminist communities as soon as possible, to avoid a deadlocked mutual escalation towards extremism on both sides. And I'm hoping that more and more people are becoming aware of that happening and that we can try to reverse that tide. So to the degree to which feminism is promoting equal treatment of all people and better understanding of consent and a better quality of life for everyone, I support them. To the degree to which feminists are promoting division and class hatred against white people, men, to the degree that they are promoting a self-victimizing attitude, an entitled attitude, or laziness, I will oppose them. And the same goes for MGTOW. To the degree that MGTOW is promoting the idea that men don't need female validation to have purpose and satisfaction in life, I support that. To the degree that MGTOWs are encouraging men to improve their minds, self-educate, improve their own health, and find ways of generating their own satisfaction and happiness in life, I support that. But to the degree that MGTOWs are promoting a reclusive, isolationist, and embittered attitude towards society and women, I oppose that. As far as pickup artists are concerned, to the degree that pickup artists are encouraging men to face their fears, overcome their anxieties, man up, and believe in themselves to accomplish what they want, not just with women, but in life in general. To the degree that pickup artists are encouraging men to elevate their status rather than bemoan their setbacks, I definitely encourage this. To the degree that some pickup artists encourage men to devalue women and compromise a woman's ability to consent or manipulate women in order to have sex with them, or encouraging mindless hedonism and self-destructive behaviors in men, I oppose that. As far as MRAs are concerned, to the degree that MRAs are spreading awareness and actively encouraging discussion of men's issues about homelessness and domestic violence and suicide, I absolutely support that, and I do feel like a significant amount of progress has been made in awareness of these issues in the last few years. To the degree that MRAs simply end up becoming a mirror image of the worst aspects of feminism and encourage self-victimizing behaviors in men and perpetuate conflict without offering solutions, I will oppose them. And I would encourage all of you, no matter what community you're a part of, to try and find some kernel of truth, some positive aspect of the philosophies and ideas that are put forward by these different communities. And when you engage with someone who is from this community, don't immediately assume the worst of them. Don't radicalize them with your misconceptions or your misgivings about their movement and write them off, but keep an open mind for bridge building and positivity. And if it's not possible to interact positively with people who are not in the same community as you, so be it. But don't close yourself off to alternative perspectives. Okay, I've been sitting in this chair for too long. I need to get up and move around some. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe. Over the next few months, I plan to do a whole series of videos on a variety of topics ranging from improving your emotional stability, improving your cognitive health, better time management, self-education, maintaining a fitness routine, picking and pursuing hobbies, improving your sexual health, drug safety, feminism versus men's rights, sociological changes, political communities, etc. I also do videos of flow arts and juggling tutorials. If any of that interests you, hopefully I'll have something that's up your alley. You can also find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is jdefiant9, which is in the video description below. Thank you guys. Peace out. Have a great day.